Hi, my name is David, and I'm 67 years old. 2 months ago, my pregnant daughter-in-law looked me in the eye and said, "You're useless, and I don't want you in this house anymore." My own son nodded in agreement, and just like that, I was thrown out of the very home I had sacrificed everything to help them buy. But what they didn't know was that while they were busy treating me like a burden, I was quietly preparing a plan. One that would make them regret underestimating me. Before I tell you how I turned my heartbreak into the sweetest revenge of my life, I want to ask you, if your own child betrayed you just when you needed love the most, what would you do? Let me know in the comments, and also tell me which city and country you're watching from, so I can thank you personally. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more true stories like this. My story didn't begin with that cruel sentence my daughter-in-law threw at me. It began many years earlier, with sacrifices I made so that my only son, Brian, could have the life I never did. I lost my wife when Brian was just 8 years old. From that day forward, I was both mother and father. I worked long shifts at the factory during the day, and then took side jobs at night just to keep food on the table. I skipped meals so he could eat, patched up my old shoes instead of buying new ones, and ignored my own health to make sure he had everything he needed. Every achievement he had in school, every medal, every certificate, I was there in the front row, cheering louder than anyone else. I didn't mind the exhaustion. In fact, I wore it like a badge of honor. I kept telling myself, one day when he's grown, he'll understand what I gave up for him. Years passed. Brian grew into a hard-working man, and I was proud when he met Chelsea. She was smart, charming, and full of ambition. When they announced they were getting married, I gave them my blessing wholeheartedly. I wanted him to have the family and stability that had been ripped away from us when his mother died. Then came the hardest decision of my life. I sold the modest little home I had worked decades to pay off. The house was more than bricks and walls. It was the place where my late wife's laughter still echoed, where Brian had taken his first steps, where every memory of my struggling but beautiful life was stored. Giving it up felt like cutting out a piece of my heart, but I told myself it was for Brian's future. I put the money toward the down payment for their new home, a 3-bedroom house in a nice neighborhood. It wasn't just their dream. In many ways, it was mine too. Seeing them start their married life in a place I had helped secure gave me comfort. Of course, with the sale of my house, I needed somewhere to live. Brian and Chelsea offered me the converted garage space. "Just until we're on our feet," Brian said. "Once we're settled, we'll figure out something better." I didn't argue. I thought, this is family. We'll make it work. Ta-ta-tee. Truth is, I didn't just move in and take space. I became the backbone of that household. I paid them rent, even though I had given up my home for them. I cooked meals, mowed the lawn, fixed leaky faucets, and even rewired the garage with my own 2 hands to make it more livable. When Chelsea's pregnancy became difficult, I was the one running errands, preparing healthy meals, and making sure the house stayed in order so she could rest. I believed I was being helpful, maybe even essential. I believed I was part of their family in more than just name, but slowly, small cracks began to show. Chelsea would make little comments, snide remarks about me being underfoot, or how she couldn't wait to have her house arranged the way she wanted. Sometimes, when she thought I wasn't listening, I'd hear her on the phone with friends, complaining that having me there felt like living with an extra responsibility. Each time, I brushed it off. "She's pregnant," I told myself. "Hormones, stress, she doesn't mean it." And when Brian didn't defend me, I excused him too. I told myself he was caught between his wife and his father, and that he loved me, even if he stayed silent. I held onto that belief, clinging to it the way a drowning man clings to a piece of driftwood. Little did I know, the day would soon come when those cracks would widen into a fracture so deep it would shatter the very foundation of everything I had sacrificed for. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day you never expect will split your life into a before and after. I was sitting in the kitchen, quietly folding laundry I had just pulled from the dryer. Chelsea came in, her phone in her hand, her face sharp with irritation. She didn't even look at me when she spoke. "David, we need you to move out before the baby comes." At first, I thought I had misheard. I set the shirt down and looked at her. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" Finally, she raised her eyes to mine, and there was no hesitation, no softness. "I said we don't want you here anymore. I need the space for the nursery. This is going to be our home, not a retirement village." Her words hit me like a physical blow. For a moment I couldn't breathe. My hands shook, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Chelsea, I've been paying rent, helping with the house, doing everything I can. Where exactly am I supposed to go?" She shrugged, scrolling through her phone as though my life wasn't hanging on her next sentence. "That's not really our problem, is it? There are senior communities. You'll meet people your own age. This house isn't big enough for all of us." Before I could answer, Brian walked in. My son, my only child, the boy I had sacrificed everything for. I looked at him, praying he would correct her, defend me, remind her of what I meant to him. Instead, he avoided my eyes. "Dad, maybe it's for the best. You deserve a place of your own, somewhere quieter. We need to focus on the baby now." My heart broke in a way I didn't know was possible. I had endured losing my wife, but this was different. This was a betrayal by the very person I had built my life around. "You're throwing me out," I whispered, my voice barely steady. Brian's tone was casual, almost dismissive. "Don't think of it that way. You've done enough. We'll manage. It's time for us to stand on our own feet." I wanted to scream, to remind him that the very ground he was standing on had been bought with the money from the home I gave up. I wanted to tell Chelsea that every meal she had eaten during her pregnancy was one I had cooked, but something inside me went cold instead. I stood, folded the last shirt with shaking hands and said, "Fine, I'll be out by the weekend." Chelsea smirked, satisfied. Brian looked relieved, as though a heavy burden had been lifted. Neither of them noticed the small, satisfied smile tugging at the corners of my mouth, because while they thought they had pushed me aside like an old piece of furniture, what they didn't realize was that I wasn't leaving empty-handed. For months, I'd been preparing for this moment, not because I expected betrayal, but because I had learned long ago that life is cruel and you have to be ready. As I walked back toward the converted garage I had called home, I whispered under my breath, "You'll regret this," and I meant it. I didn't slam doors, I didn't shout, I didn't even let them see me break. Instead, I packed my things quietly over the next 3 days, the way a man folds away a life that no longer belongs to him. What Brian and Chelsea didn't know was that I had already been preparing my exit long before Chelsea's cruel words forced the issue. It began a few months earlier when I started noticing little things about their house, the leaking roof they ignored, the way Brian's friend had cut corners on the garage conversion, the fact that Chelsea ordered expensive furniture while bills piled up unopened on the counter. I'd lived long enough and sacrificed too much not to recognize trouble when I saw it. Out of habit, I started keeping records. When city notices about property inspections came in the mail, I read them carefully. When Brian mentioned he hadn't bothered filing for permits on the garage conversion, I made a mental note. When Chelsea laughed about hiding a few credit card bills from him, I quietly tucked that information away in the back of my mind. I wasn't planning revenge then. I was just doing what I'd always done, protecting my family, even when they didn't realize they needed it. But then something unexpected happened. A few weeks before Chelsea's ultimatum, I met a man named William Hudson at a community event. He was a property developer with ambitious plans to revitalize neighborhoods, buying houses, renovating them, and selling them for triple the price. He was sharp, ambitious, and quick to notice when someone knew their way around tools, repairs, and neighborhood gossip. We struck up a conversation, and before long he offered me part-time work as a consultant. Nothing glamorous, but it felt good to use the skills I'd picked up over decades of fixing things with my own hands. I accepted, thinking it would help me pay my rent to Brian and Chelsea and give me something useful to do. That job came with access to property records, inspection checklists, and inside knowledge about how city planning really worked. And as fate would have it, one of the neighborhoods William was most interested in was the very one Brian and Chelsea had moved into. By the time Chelsea kicked me out, I already had a new lease signed on a modest but cozy apartment downtown. It wasn't large, but it was mine. Mine to lock, mine to fill with my books and memories, mine to sit in without feeling like an intruder. When the moving truck arrived, Brian's face was full of surprise. "You found a place that fast?" he asked. I smiled sweetly. "Amazing what you can accomplish when you're motivated." Chelsea rolled her eyes, but there was a flicker of something else in her expression. Doubt, maybe even regret. Too little. Too late. What neither of them realized was that the apartment wasn't my only new beginning. I had a file sitting neatly in my drawer, filled with documentation, unpermitted garage construction, overdue property taxes, credit reports, and notices from the city planning office. Information that in the right hands could mean real trouble for Brian and Chelsea. And now I was the one with those hands. I didn't plan on using it. Not at first. But as I unpacked my few belongings in my new apartment, I thought about Chelsea's smirk, Brian's silence, and the way they had dismissed me like a piece of junk furniture. I thought about the sacrifices I had made, the house I had sold, the meals I had cooked, the nights I had stayed awake worrying about them while they slept soundly in the comfort I had built for them. And slowly, a new thought began to grow. Maybe it was time they finally learned what it felt like to face consequences. I poured myself a glass of wine, leaned back in my chair, and whispered to the empty room, "You wanted me gone. Now you'll see what happens when I stop protecting you." And with that, I picked up the phone and called William Hudson. 3 days after I moved out, spring sunlight poured through the windows of my new apartment. It felt strange, almost unsettling, to wake up in a place that was truly mine. For the first time in months, I didn't hear Chelsea's sharp voice echoing through the halls, or Brian's uneasy sighs. Just silence. Peaceful, liberating silence. But peace wasn't the only thing I woke up to that morning. It was opportunity. At 9 o'clock sharp, I met William Hudson at a coffee shop just 3 blocks away from Brian and Chelsea's house. William was everything you'd expect from a successful developer: sharp suit, expensive watch, and a smile that could disarm even the most cautious homeowner. "David," he said warmly, standing to shake my hand. "Glad you could make it. I've reviewed your notes about the neighborhood. Very thorough work." I nodded. "I've lived there long enough to know where the cracks are, literally and figuratively." He chuckled. "Exactly why I need you. We're looking to acquire properties on that block, renovate, modernize, raise values. Your son's house in particular is a prime target." My heart thudded, but I kept my expression neutral. "Yes," I said slowly. "I know that property very well." By noon, we were walking up the familiar driveway of 1247 Maple Street, Brian and Chelsea's home. My old home, the place I had given up everything for, only to be cast aside like trash. Through the kitchen window, I spotted Chelsea's silhouette, She froze when she saw us approaching, her phone slipping slightly from her hand. Seconds later, Brian opened the door, confusion etched across his face. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Before I could answer, William stepped forward with professional ease. "Mr. Mitchell, my name is William Hudson. I'm with Hudson Properties. This is my property consultant, David." Brian's eyes flicked. Back to me, confusion turning quickly into dread. "Property consultant?" Chelsea appeared behind him, her pregnant belly prominent, her face pale. "What's going on? Why is he here?" I gave her a polite smile. "Hello, Chelsea. May we come in? Mr. Hudson has a very interesting proposal." Reluctantly, they stepped aside. I walked into the living room, the same living room where Chelsea had once called me useless, and this time I sat down in a chair I had never been invited to use before. William spread out documents on their coffee table. His tone was calm but firm, the way a man speaks when he already knows he has the upper hand. "I'll get straight to the point. We'd like to make an offer on your property. $450,000. Cash. 30-day closing." Chelsea gasped. Brian blinked rapidly. "But we're not looking to sell." "I understand," William said smoothly. "But you should be aware, the city has already approved redevelopment for this block. Construction will be extensive. Roads, utilities, sewage, fiber optics. The next year will be noisy, messy, and disruptive." I watched their faces tighten. Chelsea clutched Brian's arm. William continued, his voice casual but carrying weight. "There's also the matter of code compliance. Our preliminary check suggests some properties here, including yours, may have unpermitted modifications. Garage conversions, specifically." Brian's. Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. Chelsea's face turned ghostly white. I leaned forward slightly, my voice calm. "You remember the garage, don't you, Brian? The one I fixed up so I could live in it. I recall permits were never filed." Silence filled the room. The only sound was the ticking of their wall clock, loud and unforgiving. William closed his folder. "Of course, we're not here to pressure you, but the city is strict. Unpermitted work could result in fines, mandatory inspections, even red tagging the property. Selling now might be the simplest option." Chelsea finally found her voice. "How long? How long do we have to decide?" William checked his calendar. "We'll keep the offer open until Friday. After that, construction begins and conditions will become challenging." He slid his card across the table, then stood. I followed his lead. "Thank you for your time," I said pleasantly. "I hope everything works out for the best." As we stepped onto the porch, I allowed myself the smallest smile. For months, they had treated me like an inconvenience, a burden, someone to be discarded. But now, they were the ones squirming, trapped in a web of consequences they never saw coming. Behind us, through the doorway, I heard Brian's shaky voice. "Dad, wait." But I didn't wait. For the first time in years, I walked away with my head high, my dignity intact, and the knowledge that the tables had finally turned. The very next morning, my phone started buzzing before I'd even finished my coffee. Brian's name lit up the screen. I let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, Chelsea called. Then Brian again. They were panicking. Good. By the third call, I finally answered. "Dad, what the hell was that yesterday?" Brian's voice was high-pitched, desperate. "Language, Brian," I said evenly, taking a slow sip of my coffee. "And I think Mr. Hudson made himself very clear. You can't be serious. That man is talking about tearing apart our neighborhood. And you," his voice cracked, "you're helping him." "Helping him?" I repeated softly. "No. Son, I'm working with him. There's a difference." There was a long silence, then a shaky whisper. "Why are you doing this to us?" I smiled grimly. "Why did you throw me out of your home after I gave up mine for you? Actions have consequences, Brian. Surely you know that by now." I hung up before he could respond. That evening there was a knock at my apartment door. Through the peephole I saw Chelsea, her eyes red and puffy, mascara streaking down her face. For a moment I almost didn't open it, but curiosity won. When I did, she didn't even wait for me to invite her in. "Please," she said, her voice trembling. "I was wrong. I was stressed. I said things I didn't mean. You can't let this happen. You can't destroy our lives because of one mistake." I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. "One mistake? Chelsea, you convinced my son to throw me out of the home I helped you buy. You called me useless. That's not a mistake. That's who you are." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "We'll pay you back. Whatever you want, just please think of the baby." Her hand moved protectively over her belly, and for the briefest second, my heart softened. But then I remembered the smirk on her face when I had agreed to move out, the relief in Brian's eyes when they thought they were free of me. "The baby will be fine," I said coldly. "It's you and Brian who will finally learn what happens when you throw people away." I closed the door. The next day I got a call from Patricia Hayes, a mortgage officer at Brian's bank. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, "your son listed you as an emergency contact. I wanted to confirm some details regarding a home equity line of credit he's requested." I frowned. "What details?" "Well, our appraiser flagged some issues with unpermitted modifications. The garage appears to have been converted without documentation. Before we can approve his request, the property would need to be brought into compliance." I almost laughed. The very thing I had warned Brian about was now biting him directly. "And why are you calling me?" And I asked carefully. "Your son insisted you had experience with construction management and had already agreed to handle the permit process." I let out a slow breath. "Ms. Hayes, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not involved in any such arrangement. Whatever Brian told you, he was mistaken." She hesitated. "I see. Thank you for clarifying." After hanging up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, anger bubbling up. Even now, even after everything, Brian was still trying to use me to solve his problems. He hadn't learned a thing. 2 days later, Chelsea's parents showed up at my door, Frank and Linda Morrison. I hadn't seen them since the wedding. "David," Frank began gruffly, "we need to talk about this situation. Chelsea is 8 months pregnant. The stress isn't good for her." Linda's voice was softer. "Surely this can be resolved. She told us there was just a misunderstanding, that you felt pushed out over privacy issues." I raised my eyebrows. "Is that what she told you?" They exchanged uneasy glances. I went to my kitchen drawer and pulled out a folder, the one with every document I'd been keeping. Notices from the city, permit violations, financial warnings. I laid them neatly on the table. "Here's the truth," I said, my voice calm but sharp. "I sacrificed my home, my savings, my peace of mind for Brian and Chelsea, and this is how they repaid me, by calling me useless and throwing me out. And now that their bad decisions have caught up with them, suddenly they want me back to fix everything." Linda went pale. Frank clenched his fists. "She called you useless?" Linda whispered. "Among other things." Frank shook his head. "We raised her better than that." "Maybe you did," I replied evenly, "but people reveal their true character when they think they can get away with it. Brian made his choice. Chelsea made hers. Now they can deal with the consequences." Viaish Morrison's left looking shaken, promising to have a serious conversation with their daughter. I watched them go with a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. That weekend, Brian showed up at my apartment. He looked thinner, dark circles under his eyes, his shoulders slumped. "Dad," he said hoarsely, "please. We're drowning here. Chelsea's terrified. We don't know what to do. You've always fixed things. Please fix this." For a moment, I just stared at him, the boy I had once carried on my shoulders, the man who now looked at me like I was his last hope. And I realized with a sudden, painful clarity that he still didn't see me as his father. He saw me as his safety net, his problem solver, his last resort. I shook my head. No, Brian, this time you're on your own. His eyes filled with tears. You can't mean that. I do. I meant it the moment you and Chelsea told me. I didn't belong in your home. You made your choice. Now live with it. He sank onto my couch, his face buried in his hands. For the first time in his life, my son looked utterly defeated, and for the first time in my life, I didn't rush to save him. 3 nights after Brian broke down in my apartment, there was another knock at my door. This time, when I looked, through the peephole I saw both of them, Brian and Chelsea. She looked exhausted, her face pale, one hand resting heavily on her swollen belly. Brian looked worse, defeated. I opened the door but didn't invite them in. Dad, Brian began, his voice hoarse, we need to talk, please. Chelsea's eyes filled with tears. I know I hurt you. I know what I said was unforgivable, but we're drowning and we don't know where else to turn. Please, David, please help us. I leaned against the doorframe, my arms folded. Help you, I repeated slowly. Chelsea, do you remember standing in that kitchen and calling me useless? Do you remember telling me I didn't belong in this house, that I was in the way? Her face crumpled. I was wrong. I was scared. I didn't mean it. Yes, you did. I cut her off. You meant every word. You saw me as an old man taking up space. And Brian, I turned to my son, you stood there and let her. You nodded while she threw me out of the home I sacrificed everything to give you. Brian's lips trembled. Dad, I was trying to keep the peace. I didn't want to fight with her while she was pregnant. I shook my head slowly. You didn't want to fight, so you chose the easier path, at my expense. You thought I would always be there, silent and forgiving, cleaning up after your mistakes. The silence stretched heavy between us. Then Brian whispered, What do you want from us? What will it take to fix this? I almost laughed. The desperation in his voice, the same man who had looked relieved when I agreed to move out, now begging me for salvation. You can't fix this, I said finally. My voice was calm, steady, colder than I expected it to be. This isn't about money or houses or permits. This is about respect. And once it's gone, it doesn't come back so easily. Chelsea wiped at her tears, her voice rising with panic. So that's it? You're going to let us lose everything? You're going to destroy us over hurt feelings? Hurt feelings? I repeated, my tone sharp. Chelsea, I sold my home, my wife's home for you. I gave you my savings. I lived in a garage and paid you rent. I cooked your meals. I fixed your house. And you repaid me by calling me useless and shoving me out the door. Don't you dare reduce that to hurt feelings. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. Brian finally spoke again, his voice small. Dad, I know we failed you. I know we broke something that may never heal. But please, for the baby, she deserves stability. For a long moment I just looked at them. My son, the boy I had carried on my shoulders, now hollow-eyed and broken. His wife, sobbing on my doorstep, finally realizing the weight of her cruelty, and then I said the words I had been holding in for weeks. I was protecting you, Brian. I had already arranged to bring the garage into compliance. I had contractors, ready permits lined up, everything. It would have cost me thousands, but I was going to do it, quietly, as my moving out gift to you. You never even knew how close you were to being saved. Their faces drained of color. Brian staggered back a step. You were going to fix it? Yes, I said simply, until you made it clear I wasn't family anymore. You wanted me gone. So I left, and I stopped protecting you. Chelsea broke into fresh sobs. Brian pressed his hands to his face. It's too late now, I said quietly. Mr. Hudson was always coming. The development was always happening. The only question was whether you'd face it prepared or blindsided. You chose blindsided. For a long, heavy silence, no one spoke. Then I stepped back and closed the door gently but firmly. On the other side, I heard muffled crying, then the sound of their footsteps retreating down the hall. I leaned against the door, my chest tight, not with regret, but with finality. For the first time in my life, I had refused to be their savior, and it felt liberating. A week later, the decision was made for them. Brian and Chelsea sold the house to William Hudson. The offer had been too good to refuse, and the alternative, tens of thousands in fines, mandatory inspections, and the chaos of redevelopment, was impossible. After paying off their mortgage and fees, they walked away with about $60,000, enough to buy a smaller home in a cheaper neighborhood, but nothing like the dream house they had once believed would be their forever home. They called it a fresh start. I called it consequences. Meanwhile, I settled fully into my new apartment. For the first time in years, I felt peace. No tiptoeing around Chelsea's moods. No pretending not to hear the whispered complaints about me on the phone. No feeling like an unwanted guest in the very house I had helped build. The space was mine, the silence was mine, and the dignity was mine. 2 months later, Chelsea gave birth to a healthy baby girl. I didn't rush to the hospital. I didn't hover in waiting rooms. For the first time in Brian's life, I let him handle things without me. It was Brian who called me the next day. His voice was tired but soft. "Dad, she's beautiful. We named her Grace." There was a long pause before he added, almost pleadingly, "We'd like you to meet her." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to refuse. Part of me wanted to remind him that when I had needed family, I was cast aside. But another part of me, the part that had carried him on my shoulders, the part that had loved him through every stumble, knew that Grace was innocent. She deserved better. So a week later, I went. Chelsea looked fragile, nothing like the smug, confident woman who had once told me I was useless. She didn't meet my eyes at first. Instead, she whispered, "I'm sorry for everything. I was wrong. I didn't say I forgave her. Forgiveness is not a word you give cheaply, not when your dignity has been trampled." But I nodded, and when she placed Grace in my arms, something inside me softened. Grace's tiny hand gripped my finger, and in that moment I understood something. This wasn't about Brian or Chelsea anymore. It was about the future, about what kind of family we would build for the next generation. The months that followed weren't easy. Brian tried, in his clumsy way, to mend things. Chelsea too, though every word between us carried the weight of the past. We weren't the same, and we never would be. But slowly, cautiously, we began to rebuild, not the old relationship, but a new one with boundaries and respect. I didn't cook their meals. I didn't fix their leaky faucets. I didn't sacrifice myself for their comfort. Instead, I visited as a grandfather, not as a live-in servant. And strangely, it worked. Chelsea treated me differently. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was genuine change, but she no longer spoke to me with disdain. She asked for my opinion, thanked me when I offered help, and, most importantly, never again called me useless. Brian, too, had learned. He had seen what life looked like when his father wasn't there to fix everything, and though it had nearly broken him, he had survived. For the first time in his life, he was standing on his own feet. One evening, about 6 months later, we had dinner together. Grace sat in her high chair, babbling happily. At one point, she reached for me and said her very first word, "Grandpa." I cried. Not because everything was healed, but because I knew we had started something new. Something smaller but stronger. In the end, my revenge wasn't about destroying Brian and Chelsea. It was about teaching them what they had forgotten, that respect is not optional and family is not defined by convenience. I am 67 years old. I live in my own apartment, work part-time in a job I enjoy, and I no longer see myself as a burden. I'm a father, a grandfather, and a man who finally understands that the truest form of love is not what you endure. It's what you require. Looking back, I realized something important. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't shielding your family from consequences. It's letting them face those consequences head on. For years, I believed love meant sacrifice, silence, and endurance. I thought that if I just gave more of myself, eventually I would be valued. But the truth is, when you allow people to treat you like a burden, they start to believe it. Respect isn't something you beg for, it's something you require. By stepping away, by refusing to clean up their mess, I gave Brian and Chelsea the chance to grow. It wasn't easy, it wasn't painless, but it was necessary. And in the end, the lesson didn't just change them, it changed me too. Today, I'm no longer the man who lived in a garage, unwanted and dismissed. I'm a father who finally set boundaries, a grandfather who is loved, and a man who understands his worth. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: the best revenge isn't anger or punishment or destruction. The best revenge is reclaiming your dignity and refusing to be anyone's victim ever again. Thank you for listening to my story. Now I want to hear yours. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, how did you handle it? Did you forgive, or did you walk away? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And let me know which city and country you're watching from, so I can thank you personally. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another true family story like this one.